Edna's heels clicked against the white hospital tiles as she made her way through the long hallway of St. Peter's Hospital. It was her first day at work, and she was eager to start. She adjusted her nurse's badge, took a deep breath, and turned the corner toward the storeroom. That was when she saw it, the fridge. It stood in the corner, looking old and dirty. Its white paint had turned yellow, and there were dark scratches all over the door. A sign was taped to the front in bold letters. It said, "Dirty fridge, stay away." The fridge looked forgotten, like no one had cleaned it in years. The rest of the hospital was bright and clean, but this fridge was different, and Edna couldn't stop staring at it. A strange chill ran down her spine. Why would a fridge be labeled like that? Was it for spoiled food? Biohazardous waste? But something about it felt off. She looked around. The hallway was empty. Her curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, she reached for the handle, her fingers hesitating for just a second before she pulled the door open. The handle felt sticky and cold. Inside, she expected to see rotting food or discarded medicine. But instead, there were rows of small glass vials, neatly arranged. Each one had a white tag with a patient's name scribbled in black ink. Some names had a small red X next to them. A clipboard was taped to the inside of the door. Edna's eyes scanned the list. Her stomach turned. Every single name belonged to a black patient. Her heart pounded as she shut the fridge quickly. What had she just stumbled upon? She didn't know it yet, but opening that fridge had just changed her life forever. Edna stepped back, her breath uneven. She looked down the hallway, her hands shaking. No one was there. No one had seen her open the fridge. She needed answers. She yanked the clipboard from the fridge and flipped through the pages. It was a log of some kind, dates, treatments, and patient names. But then she noticed something terrifying. Every patient with a red X was dead. Her pulse quickened. She knew these names. Some of them were patients she had briefly seen on the roster when she was getting assigned for her shift. Hadn't Mrs. Jenkins just been admitted last week? Why was her name marked with an X? She turned another page, and her stomach dropped. The last name on the list had today's date written next to it. The patient was still alive. Edna's fingers gripped the clipboard tightly, and she had a feeling that doesn't seem right. She had two choices. 1. Ignore what she had seen and pretend everything was normal. 2. Dig deeper, find out the truth, and risk everything. Her heart pounded as she made her choice. She was going to dig deeper, but she had no idea that someone was already watching her. As Edna walked away from the fridge, her mind raced. What could this mean? Edna, you are overthinking this. This isn't serious. She tried to convince herself, but deep down she knew something was off and she needed to find out. She decided to start in the patient files room. Maybe she could match the names on the clipboard to their medical records. But just as she turned a corner, she felt it. A presence. Someone was watching her. Her skin prickled. She slowed her steps, pretending not to notice, but she could feel it. Eyes on her. She glanced at the reflection in a glass window. A shadow. Someone stood just beyond the hallway lights. Watching. Waiting. Edna's fingers tightened around the clipboard. She had to move, fast. She rushed into the file room and locked the door behind her. Her hands shook as she searched through the records, flipping through patient charts. She needed to know what was happening before it was too late. But outside the door, the shadow lingered. And whoever it was, they weren't going to let her uncover the truth that easily. Edna turned on the dim light in the file room, her breath coming fast. She had to move quickly. She scanned the files, looking for the names from the fridge. Her hands trembled as she found Mrs. Jenkins' file. She flipped through the pages. Everything looked normal at first, until she saw the last medical note. It was signed by Dr. Marcus Hale. Something about the signature sent a shiver down her spine. Dr. Hale was one of the senior doctors at St. Peter's. She had only seen him a few times during orientation, but he always seemed cold. She turned another page and stopped. There it was. A small symbol drawn in the corner of the report. A tiny red X. The same X she had seen on the clipboard. Her stomach twisted. Dr. Hale knew something. Suddenly, bang. A loud noise echoed from outside the file room. Edna froze. Someone was out there. Had they seen her? Had she just put herself in danger? She held her breath, her heart thudding. Then, the doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in, and Edna had nowhere to hide. Edna's heart pounded as the doorknob rattled again. Who was trying to get in? She backed away from the door, gripping the clipboard tightly. There was no other exit. No windows. No way to escape. She watched as the handle slowly turned. Click. The lock held. Whoever was on the other side wasn't giving up. They twisted the knob harder. Bang. The door shook as they slammed against it. Edna's breath came in short gasps. Think, Edna. Think. She looked around. The only weapon she had was the clipboard. That wouldn't stop anyone. Then she spotted something. A heavy metal paperweight on the desk. She grabbed it and raised it high. If they got in, she'd be ready. But then, silence. The rattling stopped. No footsteps. No voices. Had they left? She waited, her body frozen in fear. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Nothing. Slowly, she stepped forward, pressing her ear against the door. Silence. She reached for the knob, turning it just a little. Then, bam! A loud knock made her stumble backward. Who's in there? A voice called out. A voice she recognized. It was Dr. Hale. Edna's hands felt clammy. She tried to steady her breathing. Dr. Hale was right outside. Should she open the door? Act normal? Pretend she wasn't doing anything suspicious? Hello? He called again, his voice calm but firm. She had no choice. She took a deep breath and unlocked the door. Dr. Hale stood there, his piercing blue eyes scanning her. He was tall, with graying hair and a sharp, unreadable expression. What are you doing in the file room? He asked. Edna forced a smile. I was just looking for a patient's chart. His gaze flickered to the clipboard in her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let me know next time. You should have asked me. Something about the way he said it made her stomach twist. Edna nodded quickly. Of course, doctor. He tilted his head slightly. You're new here, right? Yes. His smile widened. Then let me give you some advice. He stepped closer. Some things in this hospital are better left alone. Edna felt a shiver run down her spine. Was that a warning? Or a threat? Edna forced herself to smile, even as her skin crawled. Dr. Hale's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long before he finally stepped back. Well, I have a patient to check on, he said smoothly. Don't stay too long. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the hall. Edna watched him go, her heart still racing. As soon as he was gone, she looked down at the clipboard in her hands. Dr. Hale had signed the charts of every single patient who had died. She needed to be careful. She needed to be smart. And most of all, she needed to stay alive. Edna barely made it through the rest of her shift. She forced herself to smile, to act normal, to pretend she hadn't just discovered something horrifying. But inside, she was panicking. There was still 5 patients on the list who wasn't dead yet. She needed to check on them. At the end of her shift, she made her way to room 302. She hesitated at the door, then gently pushed it open. A frail-looking black woman lay in the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Edna checked the name on the chart. Angela Carter. She was still alive. But for how much longer? Edna pulled up a chair and sat beside her. Angela, she whispered. The woman turned her head slightly. Edna swallowed. Do you remember who your doctor is? Angela blinked slowly. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said one word. Hale. Edna felt her stomach drop. Dr. Hale was her doctor, which meant she was next. Edna leaned closer. Angela, did Dr. Hale give you anything? Any medicine? Angela's breathing was slow and uneven. I don't know. Edna bit her lip. The list in the fridge, every patient marked with an X had died, and Angela's name was already on it. Was it too late to save her? Edna looked at the 4 bag hanging beside the bed. The liquid inside was clear, but something felt wrong. Could this be what was killing them? She needed to find out what was in that 4. She stood up quickly. Angela, I'll be right back. The woman's weak fingers gripped her wrist. Edna gasped. Angela's eyes, filled with fear, locked onto hers. Don't let him touch me again. Edna's breath caught in her throat. Then, suddenly, Angela's body started shaking violently. Her heart monitor began to scream. Edna grabbed her shoulders. Angela, stay with me. But deep down, she already knew. She might be too late. Angela's body convulsed violently, her thin frame jerking against the hospital bed. Edna's hands shook as she pressed the emergency call button. I need help in room 302. Now, the heart monitor screamed. Her pulse was dropping fast. Angela was dying. Nurses and doctors rushed in, but Edna barely heard them. Her mind was racing. This wasn't normal. Something had. Her eyes darted to the 4 bag. Had Dr. Hale given her something? Was this the moment he had planned for? She grabbed the 4-tube and yanked it out. Blood spurted from the needle site, but she didn't care. If this liquid was what was killing her, she had to stop it. Move, a doctor shouted, pushing her aside. Someone began chest compressions. Another nurse adjusted the oxygen mask over Angela's face. Edna clenched her fists as she backed away. She had seen the pattern. Every patient with an X on the clipboard had died suddenly. Just like this. And Dr. Hale was always there. Her eyes scanned the room, and then she froze. He was watching. Dr. Hale stood just outside the door, hands in his white coat pockets, expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he did something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. He smirked, like he already knew what was going to happen next. Angela's body jerked with each compression. Edna clenched her hands, whispering please, please, please under her breath. Then, beep, a long, flat line. The room fell silent. Edna's stomach twisted. No, she whispered. A doctor sighed and checked his watch. Time of death, 8:42 p.m. Edna felt something inside her snap. She wasn't imagining this. This wasn't just a coincidence. Angela had been murdered. And Dr. Hale, he knew it. As the other nurses covered Angela's face with a white sheet, Edna turned toward the door. But Dr. Hale was already gone. Edna walked out of room 302, her hands balled into fists. She felt sick. Angela was gone. And now, the list in the fridge? Every single name had an X, are all dead. She knew too much now. Dr. Hale would know that she knew. She had to be careful. As she walked down the hallway toward the locker room, the hospital lights flickered slightly. The hall was emptier than usual. Quiet. Too quiet. Something wasn't right. Her pulse quickened as she stepped inside the locker room. The air was cold. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Then she saw it. A note, taped to her locker. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. Only 3 words were written in red ink. Stop. Or die. Edna's heart stopped. Someone had been here. Someone knew what she was doing. Her eyes darted around the locker room. It was empty. But was she being watched? She backed away, her breath shaky. She needed help. But who could she trust? Most of the doctors worked under Hale. Nurses were afraid of losing their jobs. If she reported this, would anyone believe her? She shoved the note into her pocket and hurried out of the room. As she reached the hospital exit, she glanced behind her. Was someone following her? She couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her. But when she stepped outside into the cold night air, a black car sat parked across the street. Its engine was running. And inside, someone was watching her. Edna's stomach twisted as she locked eyes with the figure inside the car. She couldn't see their face, just a dark silhouette. But they were staring at her. Her instincts screamed at her to run. She turned quickly and headed for her own car. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the keys. Triggered this. Click. Unlock. Open. She jumped inside and slammed the door shut. When she looked up, the black car was gone. Her chest rose and fell in panicked breaths. She wasn't being paranoid. She was being watched. And now, she was in danger. Edna drove straight home, her hands gripping the wheel tight. She needed to talk to someone. She couldn't go to the hospital director. What if they were involved? The police? Would they even believe her? She only had one option. Her best friend, Malik. He was a journalist, always chasing the truth. If anyone would help her, it was him. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then, Edna. His voice was groggy, like he had just woken up. Malik, I need you, she whispered. Something bad is happening at St. Peter's. People are dying. Silence. Then, come over, he said. Now. Edna nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She put the car in gear and sped toward the only person left she could trust. But what she didn't know was, someone was already ahead of her, and they weren't going to let her get to Malik alive. Edna's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove through the dark, empty streets. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She glanced in the rearview mirror. No headlights. No cars behind her. But she still felt it. Someone was watching. She pressed the gas pedal a little harder. Malik's apartment was only 10 minutes away. If she could just get there, she'd be safe. Or at least, safer. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced down. Malik. She put him on speaker. I'm almost there. His voice came through, low and tense. Edna, you sure no one followed you? I think so. Think isn't good enough, he muttered. You don't know how deep this goes. Edna swallowed. You believe me? A pause. Then, of course I do. Relief flooded her chest. Someone was on her side. She was about to respond when her headlights hit something up ahead. A car stopped sideways in the middle of the road, blocking her path. Her stomach twisted. No, no, no. She slammed the brakes. Her car skidded to a stop, just inches from the black SUV. Then, the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. Edna's blood ran cold. It was Dr. Hale. Edna's fingers shook as she reached for the gear shift. Reverse. Now. She slammed it into reverse and hit the gas. Her tires screeched against the pavement. But before she could move, another car appeared behind her. Trapped. Panic surged through her. She was boxed in. Dr. Hale walked slowly toward her, his hands calmly tucked into the pockets of his coat. He wasn't in a rush. Like he already knew she wasn't going anywhere. She locked the doors. Her breath came in short gasps. Hale reached her window and leaned down, staring at her through the glass. His lips curved into that same smug smirk. Then he knocked. Tap, tap, tap. Like this was just a friendly conversation. Edna's mind raced. Think, Edna. Think. Her phone. She grabbed it and put it back on speaker. Malik, she gasped. I need help. He's here. But all she heard was static. Then, a distorted voice. Hello, Edna. Her stomach turned to ice. That wasn't Malik. It was Dr. Hale. He was on the call. He had intercepted it. Edna's grip tightened around the phone as her blood ran cold. Get out of the car, Hale said, his voice smooth and calm. Let's talk. No. No way. Then Hale gave a slow, amused nod. This isn't over, he said, adjusting his coat. Then he walked away. His men followed, disappearing into the darkness. Edna's legs finally gave out. She collapsed into Malik's arms, gasping for breath. It's okay, he whispered. I got you. But Edna knew the truth. This was far from okay. Dr. Hale had let them go, which meant he had something worse planned. Malik's apartment was small but safe. For now, Edna sat on his couch, still shaking. Malik placed a warm cup of tea in front of her. Drink. She didn't. She looked up at him. Malik, this goes deeper than I thought. He nodded. I know. She blinked. You do? Malik sighed and ran a hand over his beard. I've been investigating St. Peter's for months, but I never had proof. Until now. He grabbed his laptop and turned it toward her. The screen showed a folder filled with files, each one labeled with a patient's name, each one connected to Dr. Hale. Edna's stomach turned. He's been doing this for years, Malik said. And now? We will expose him. Edna exhaled shakily. She had wanted the truth. Now she had it. And the truth was worse than she had ever imagined. She looked up at Malik. What do we do now? Malik's expression was grim. We bring him down. Edna's heart pounded, because she knew one thing for sure. Dr. Hale wasn't going to let that happen. And the next time he came for her, he wouldn't miss. Edna barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dr. Hale's smirk, heard his voice. Some things are better left alone. But she couldn't leave it alone. Not now. Morning came too fast. Malik was already at his desk, typing away on his laptop, pulling up files, scanning through old hospital records. We need hard proof, he said, eyes flicking to her. Something that can't be covered up. Edna nodded. The fridge, she whispered. The vials. If we can get one of them tested. A crash outside the window made them both jump. Malik rushed to the blinds and peeked out. His face went pale. What is it? Edna asked, heart pounding. He turned to her slowly. Our first warning. Edna moved beside him and gasped. Her car was on fire. Flames curled up from the hood, thick black smoke rising into the morning sky. And beside it, spray-painted in red on the pavement, were 3 words. Stop or die. Malik grabbed her arm. We need to go? Now. But he was already pulling her toward the door. They know where I live. We can't stay here. They slipped out the back alley, hurrying down the street. We need to get to the hospital, Edna whispered. If we can grab a vial. That's exactly what they expect us to do, Malik said, leading her toward a small diner. We have to be smart about this. They slid into a booth. Malik pulled out his phone, fingers moving fast. I'm calling someone I trust. A scientist. If we get a sample, he can analyze it for us. Edna chewed her lip. And if it's poison? Malik looked at her. Then we expose them all. But why would they want to poison blacks? Edna asked, confused. We will find out, Malik responded. An hour later, they sat parked near the hospital in a stolen car. Well, technically, it was Malik's cousin's car, but still. Edna exhaled. How do we do this? Malik handed her a lab coat. You walk in like you belong. Edna put it on, adjusting the badge Malik had forged for her. Be quick, he warned. In and out. Edna nodded, then stepped out of the car. Her hands were shaking as she walked through the hospital doors. If Dr. Hale saw her, if anyone saw her, this would be over. For good. She walked through the halls, heart racing. The fridge was still there, just like before. Edna took one last look around, then pulled it open. The vials were still there. Her fingers hovered over them, choosing one at random. She grabbed it, shoving it into her pocket. Then she reached for the clipboard. She had to know. Were there new names? She flipped to the last page and froze. Her name was on the list, and it had a red X. Her breath stopped. She was marked. She needed to get out. Now. She spun and slammed into Dr. Hale. His grip tightened around her wrist. His smile was slow, calculated. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? Edna yanked free and ran. Hold her, Hale shouted. Footsteps pounded behind her. She sprinted through the halls, pushing past nurses, dodging carts. The exit was so close. Then, a needle jabbed into her neck. The world tilted. Her vision blurred. She fell, and the last thing she saw was Dr. Hale's face. Smiling, she woke up to cold metal. Her arms and legs were strapped down. Dim lights flickered overhead. She wasn't in the hospital anymore. She was in the basement. And she wasn't alone. Dr. Hale sat beside her, adjusting a syringe. His voice was almost gentle. You should have listened, Edna. She struggled, but the straps were too tight. You see, he continued, tapping the syringe. People like you? You ask too many questions. He leaned closer. But don't worry. You won't be asking anything soon. He raised the needle, and then the door burst open. Gunshots. Screams. And Malik, holding a gun. Step away from her, he growled. Dr. Hale smiled. But he didn't move. Because this wasn't over yet. The room erupted into chaos. Malik fired another shot, barely missing Dr. Hale's head. The bullet shattered a glass cabinet behind him. Hale ducked, his expression darkening. You're making a mistake. Malik didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, grabbing the syringe from Hale's hand and slamming his fist into his jaw. The doctor stumbled back, cursing. Edna, can you move? Malik shouted. Edna struggled against the straps. Her body felt weak. The drug was already in her system. Malik yanked at the restraints, freeing her arms first. Dr. Hale wiped the blood from his lip and straightened. You really think you're leaving this place? Footsteps pounded outside. More people were coming. Get her out of here. Malik barked at the other man who had come with him, his friend, Jace. Jace nodded and hoisted Edna up. No, Malik, she gasped, still weak. Malik turned toward Hale, his grip tightening around the gun. Go, Edna. I'll handle him. Edna's stomach twisted. She didn't want to leave him behind. But then, the door burst open. Armed guards rushed in. Go, Malik roared. Jace didn't hesitate. He dragged Edna toward the back door, forcing her through a side exit. Her last sight of Malik was him standing his ground, gun raised, as the guards swarmed him. Then, the door slammed shut. Jace didn't stop running. Edna's legs barely worked, her body still foggy from the drug. But she forced herself to move. They ran through a dark corridor, up a set of old stairs, and then burst out into the night air. The hospital's back alley. Come on. Jace panted, leading her toward a black car parked nearby. She could barely think. Malik was still inside. She stopped. We have to go back for him. Jace grabbed her arm. No, we need to get this evidence out first. Edna's mind spun. He was right. The vial in her pocket. The only real proof of what was happening at St. Peter's. If they got caught now, it was over. A car door flew open. Get in, a voice shouted. It was Malik's cousin, Tasha. Jace shoved Edna into the back seat and jumped in after her. The moment the door shut, Tasha floored the gas pedal. The car screeched into the street, speeding away from the hospital. Edna twisted around, looking out the window. She could see figures running out of the hospital. They were looking for her, looking to kill her. And Malik was still inside. Tasha didn't slow down until they were far from the hospital, weaving through side streets to lose any possible tail. Edna's heart pounded. She pulled the vial out of her pocket, holding it tightly. This was it. The proof. She turned to Jace. We need to go back for Malik. Jace exhaled. We can't just walk back in there, Edna. We need a plan. Tasha glanced at them through the rearview mirror. Malik told me if anything went wrong, we meet at the safe house. Edna's chest tightened. Safe house. Jace nodded. Somewhere secure. Off the grid. If Malik gets out, he'll meet us there. If. Edna clutched the vial. They had the evidence. Now, they just needed to survive long enough to use it. And pray that Malik made it out alive. The safe house was an abandoned warehouse near the outskirts of town. Tasha parked the car behind a rusted dumpster. We lay low here until we hear from Malik. Edna's stomach was in knots. What if they never did? Inside, the air was musty. Old furniture was covered in sheets. Jace checked the windows while Tasha turned on an old radio for background noise. Edna sat at the table, gripping the vial. We need to test this, she whispered. Jace nodded. Malik already set that up. We just need to get it to his contact. But before anyone could say another word, the warehouse lights flickered. Then, a phone rang. A single, old rotary phone sat on a desk in the corner. They hadn't touched it. Edna's breath caught. No one should know they were here. Jace and Tasha exchanged looks. The phone kept ringing. Edna swallowed hard and stepped forward. She picked up the receiver with a trembling hand. Hello. A familiar voice chuckled on the other end. Dr. Hale, did you really think you could hide from me, Edna? The line went dead. And outside, a car engine rumbled. They weren't alone. Edna's blood ran cold. Dr. Hale had found them. Jace rushed to the window, peeking outside. His face hardened. 3 cars. Black SUVs. Armed men. Tasha grabbed a gun from under her jacket. We need to move. Now. Edna's fingers clenched around the vial in her pocket. They had the proof. But if they got caught, they'd never make it out alive. A voice called from outside. Dr. Hale. Edna, we both know how this ends. Come out now, and maybe I'll let your friends live. Her breath caught. Tasha muttered under her breath. Lying piece of. A loud bang echoed through the warehouse. The front door shook. They were breaking in. Jace grabbed Edna's arm. Back exit. Move. She didn't hesitate. They ran through the dark warehouse, dodging stacks of old crates and broken furniture. Behind them, the door crashed open. Heavy boots stomped in. They were inside, hunting them. Tasha led the way, pushing open a rusted metal door. Go, go, go. They burst into the alleyway. Rain poured down. Their car was gone, blocked in by Hale's SUVs. Jace cursed. We're on foot. No time to think. No time to plan. They ran. The night swallowed them. Cold rain soaked Edna's hair as she sprinted through the dark alleys. Footsteps pounded behind them. Shouts. Orders. Find them. They turned a corner. A tall chain-link fence blocked the way. Jace jumped first, climbing fast. Tasha was next. Edna grabbed the metal, hauling herself up. Then, a gunshot. The bullet whizzed past her head. Edna's breath hitched. Faster, faster. She pulled herself over the top, dropping hard onto the other side. Jace grabbed her arm. Keep moving. More shots. Sparks flew as bullets hit the fence. They bolted through the back streets, twisting and turning through the maze of the city. They needed to lose them. And then, a black van screeched to a stop in front of them. The door slid open. A familiar face inside. Malik. Get in. Edna froze. She blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. Malik. He reached for her. Come on. No time. Jace pulled her in first, then Tasha jumped in after them. The second the door slammed shut, the van took off. Edna gasped for air, her body shaking. Malik turned toward her. Are you okay? She grabbed his face, making sure he was real. You were still in the hospital, she breathed. How did you? Malik smirked. Had a little help. That's when she noticed the driver. A man in his 50s. Rugged. Military-like. Malik nodded at him. Meet Agent Carter. FBI. Edna's heart stopped. FBI? Agent Carter glanced at her through the mirror. I hear you have evidence that could take down a very powerful man. Edna's fingers tightened around the vial. This was it. They had a chance. But Dr. Hale? He wasn't going down without a fight. The van drove through the city until they reached a hidden warehouse on the edge of town. As they waited for the lab results, Edna's thoughts drifted back to painful memories. Tears began to stream down her face as she recalled how her mother had been rushed into St. Peter's years ago after what was dismissed as a minor home accident. At first, the doctors assured her it was nothing serious, but then her mother's condition inexplicably worsened. Over time, what should have been a routine recovery turned into a slow, mysterious decline that ended in heartbreak. Edna had always suspected something was off about her mother's death. Now, holding the vial in trembling hands, that long-buried suspicion took on a horrifying new reality. An hour later, the lab results came in. Agent Carter put them on speaker. A woman's voice crackled through the line. "We tested the vial," the scientist announced. Edna leaned forward, heart pounding. "The substance is an experimental vaccine candidate," the scientist continued. "It was developed as a breakthrough measure to protect against a deadly viral threat that's been looming over our society, a virus that could wipe out millions if left unchecked. However, the formulation is highly unstable and completely unapproved by the FDA." There was a pause before the scientist's tone grew even more grave. "Our analysis indicates that while this candidate shows potential in stimulating an immune response, it has catastrophic side effects in patients with certain genetic markers. In our trials, these adverse reactions, severe immune responses leading to organ failure, have manifested exclusively in Black patients." Edna's blood ran cold. Malik clenched his fists. "So, they're testing this vaccine on Black patients?" "Exactly," the scientist replied somberly. "Dr. Hale and his collaborators have exploited the existing disparities in healthcare. They deliberately selected vulnerable Black patients as unwitting test subjects under the guise of developing a vaccine that could save lives. Instead, they're using them as guinea pigs, refining a formulation that repeatedly causes fatal reactions." Edna covered her mouth as nausea rose in her throat. "You mean they're perfecting this vaccine by sacrificing lives?" The scientist's voice was heavy with regret. "Yes. Historical precedents like the Tuskegee syphilis study have shown how minority communities are exploited in the name of science. This vaccine candidate was never meant for mass use until it's perfected. But to perfect it, they're running illegal human trials on those they deem expendable." A deadly silence filled the room. Jace cursed under his breath while Tasha shook her head, fury in her eyes. He was experimenting on them, using them as lab rats for a vaccine that's supposed to save lives. Malik slammed a fist against the table. "Hale's running a covert operation, exploiting the most vulnerable to perfect a vaccine for a disease that threatens everyone, all while hiding behind a facade of public health." Tracked. Agent Carter was already on the phone. "We need full federal intervention. Now." But before he could finish, Edna's tears mixed with resolve. The personal pain of losing her mother, and the realization that her death might not have been an isolated tragedy, steeled her determination. She could no longer stand by. She had to expose the truth, even if it meant risking her own life. Agent Carter was already on the phone. "We need full federal intervention. Now." But before he could finish, the power cut out. The room went pitch black. Edna's heart stopped. Then, the warehouse door exploded inward, and Dr. Hale walked in. Gunfire erupted. Agent Carter's men pulled their weapons. Dr. Hale's mercenaries stormed in, returning fire. Edna ducked, heart hammering. Malik grabbed her. "We have to go now." They sprinted toward the back exit, dodging bullets. Jace covered them, firing at the incoming attackers. Tasha pulled open a hidden door. "Come on." They ran down a dark tunnel. Explosions shook the building above them. Then, silence. Edna turned, panting. They had escaped. But Jace was no longer with them. The underground tunnel stretched on for what felt like forever. Edna's breath was ragged, her body aching, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when Dr. Hale was still out there. Malik led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "We need to get to the next safe house. Carter has backup waiting." Edna's mind spun. They had the proof. The FBI had seen the results. But Hale had powerful people protecting him. Would it be enough? Behind them, Tasha moved in silence, his guns ready. Then boom. A deafening explosion rocked the tunnel. Dust and debris rained down. Edna stumbled, gasping. Malik caught her. "They're collapsing the tunnels." "Move." They ran. The ground shook beneath their feet. Tom was running out. And Dr. Hale wasn't done yet. They burst out of the tunnel into an abandoned subway station. The flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows. Edna gasped for breath. Tasha scanned the area. "Carter said they'd meet us here." Jace kept his gun raised. "What if they don't make it in time?" Malik checked his phone. No signal. Edna swallowed hard. "Then we fight." A chilling laugh echoed through the station. They froze. Dr. Hale's voice came from the shadows. "Oh, Edna, you should have stopped when you had the chance." Edna's heart pounded. She turned slowly, scanning the darkness. Hale stepped forward, his suit pristine despite the chaos. Behind him, 5 armed men, guns raised. Malik positioned himself in front of Edna. "We're not scared of you." Hale smirked. "Oh, but you should be." His gaze locked onto Edna. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said softly. "This isn't just me. This goes higher. Much higher." Edna's stomach twisted. How deep did this go? Hale took a step closer. "Give me the vial, and I'll let you walk away." "Lies." Edna tightened her fist around the vial in her pocket. She met Hale's gaze. "Go to hell." Hale sighed. Disappointing. Then, he raised his hand, and his men opened fire. Gunfire exploded through the subway station. Edna dove behind a pillar, her heart racing. Jace and Tasha returned fire, bullets whizzing past her head. Malik grabbed her arm. "We have to move." They sprinted down the platform. A train sat on the tracks, abandoned. Edna rushed inside. The others followed, slamming the doors behind them. "Drive it!" Jace shouted. Tasha jumped into the operator's seat, flipping switches. The train lurched to life. Edna held onto the metal bar as the subway car roared forward. Behind them, Hale's men chased the train. Gunfire shattered the windows. But it was too late. The train was gone. For now, Edna sat on the cold subway floor, shaking. Malik pressed a hand to his side. He was bleeding. Jace ripped his sleeve, pressing it to the wound. "It's not deep." Tasha adjusted the train's speed. "We're headed toward the old tunnels. Carter should be waiting." Edna exhaled sharply. Hale had hinted at something bigger. Who else was behind this? Her fingers clenched around the vial. They had to expose everything, before it was too late. The train slowed. A dimly lit tunnel stretched ahead. A black SUV sat waiting. Edna's chest tightened. "Is it Carter?" Malik checked his gun. "We're about to find out." The doors slid open. Edna stepped out first. Agent Carter stood beside the SUV, grim-faced. "You made it." Edna held out the vial. "We have the proof." Carter took it, inspecting the liquid inside. Then he exhaled. "This is enough." A beat of silence. Then, "Get in. We're taking this to Washington." The SUV sped through the dark streets. Carter's phone rang. He answered. "We have it." Edna leaned forward. "Who are you calling?" Carter met her gaze. "The Department of Justice." Edna's pulse quickened. This was it. They were finally going to expose Hale. By morning, the news broke. A whistleblower report detailed illegal medical experiments at St. Peter's Hospital. The FBI raided the hospital. Dr. Hale's face was everywhere. But something was wrong. Because Hale had disappeared. Edna sat in a government-safe house, watching the news. Malik sat beside her, bandaged but alive. Jace and Tasha paced. Carter walked in, expression tense. "Hale's gone." Edna's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "He vanished before the raid." She swallowed hard. "He's still out there." Hale was a ghost. His bank accounts? Wiped. His house? Empty. Edna clenched her fists. This wasn't over. Not yet. That night, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. Her heart stopped. She answered. Silence. Then, Dr. Hale's voice. "Did you really think you won?" Edna froze. "Hale." His voice was calm. "You exposed me, yes. But you'll never stop what I started." Her stomach twisted. "Where are you?" A chuckle. "Closer than you think." The call ended. Edna's fingers tightened around the phone. This wasn't over. She wouldn't stop until he was behind bars. Or dead. A year later, Edna stood outside St. Peter's Hospital. Under new leadership. Safe. But Hale? Still missing. The vials were destroyed. The victims' families got justice. But Edna knew one thing. Hale was still out there. Waiting. Watching. And one day, she'd find him. And end this. For good. Edna stared at the television screen in her small apartment. It had been a year since Dr. Hale vanished. His name had faded from the news. The world had moved on. But she hadn't. Because she knew the truth. Hale was still out there. Waiting. Watching. And she was going to find him. Her phone rang, and it was Malik. She answered on the first ring. "I found him." Edna's jaw tightened. Tonight, the hunt for Dr. Hale begins. Malik picked her up in an unmarked SUV. Inside, Jace and Tasha were already waiting. They landed in Brazil, following a lead from an underground doctor's network. Edna could feel it. They were close. Too close. Their first stop was a private clinic in Rio. A nurse there recognized the photo. "I saw him," she whispered. "He was here last month." Edna's heart raced. But then the nurse shook her head. But he's already gone. She swallowed hard. They had missed him. Again. But she wasn't giving up. Not now. Night fell over the city. They regrouped in their safe house, going over their next move. Then, boom. The door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted. Edna hit the ground as bullets shattered the windows. Jace returned fire. It's an ambush. Edna's mind spun. Had Hale set them up? She crawled toward the back exit. But before she could reach it, a dark figure grabbed her from behind. A needle plunged into her neck. She gasped. The world spun. Then, darkness. When Edna woke up, her wrists were tied. She was in a dark room. Cold. Footsteps echoed. Then a voice. Smooth. Calm. Familiar. Hello, Edna. She turned her head slowly. Dr. Hale sat across from her, smiling. I knew you'd come looking for me, he said. And now? You're right where I want you. Edna's breath came fast. Hale leaned forward. You think you won back in the States? You didn't. He pulled out a folder. Inside, new names. New patients. More victims. Edna's blood ran cold. You think you can stop me? Hale chuckled. You have no idea how deep this goes. She clenched her fists. You won't win, she whispered. Hale smirked. I already have. Edna's mind raced. She was trapped. But she wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, Malik, Jace, and Tasha were looking for her. She just had to hold on. She took a slow breath. Stay calm. Hale stood up. I'll be back soon. The moment he left, she started working on the ropes. She had one chance. And if she failed, she was dead. Gunfire. Yelling. Then, a door burst open. Edna, Malik, Jace tore through her restraints. Tasha covered them, firing at Hale's men. Edna grabbed a gun. And then, she saw him. Dr. Hale. Running. Not this time. She chased after him. Hale ran through the dark corridor. But Edna was right behind him. She raised her gun. Stop. Hale froze. Slowly, he turned. Are you really going to shoot me, Edna? He asked, smiling. Her hands shook. She wanted to. She needed to. But then, Malik appeared. Put him down, he said. Edna's breath hitched. She could end this. Right now? But instead, she lowered the gun. Because Hale wasn't getting an easy way out. He was going to face justice. For every single life he had taken, Malik handcuffed him. And for the first time, Hale's smile faded. He had lost. For good. 3 months later, Dr. Hale stood trial. His crimes were exposed. Every patient, every experiment, every name on that clipboard. Edna sat in the front row, watching as the judge delivered the sentence. Life in prison. No parole. No escape. Edna finally exhaled. It was over. Malik squeezed her hand. We did it. She looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free.